Good morning, bonjour. Merci d'être venu ce matin. Thank you all for coming to this panel on a very challenging but very important topic in today's world, against anti-Semitism. My name is Judith Weiss-Woodsworth. I'm a translator. One of my recent works was a translation of Pierre Anctil's masterful history of the Jews in Quebec, which included a very nuanced and balanced treatment of issues of anti-Semitism, or what he calls anti-Judaism in Quebec. The BlueMet program provides a definition from the Oxford English Dictionary of anti-Semitism. The definition reads as follows: characterized by prejudice, hostility, or discrimination against Jewish people on religious, cultural, or ethnic grounds, anti-Jewish. The blurb goes on to say, anti-Semitism is condemned by law in democratic countries, but continues to emerge in different forms. We are here today to discuss the various manifestations of anti-Semitism, its implications, the reasons behind it, and how we can deal with it in a world in which many forms of prejudice, hostility, and discrimination continue to exist, directed against and perpetrated by many peoples across the world. We are fortunate to have three very distinguished, accomplished panelists this morning who come to us from different backgrounds, both Jewish and non-Jewish, from very different parts of the world. And I'm sure that they're going to bring a range of very interesting perspectives and insights on this sensitive issue. I would now like to introduce them to you. So starting on my far left, Yael Weiss was born in Mexico City in 1977. She studied modern literature at the Sorbonne in Paris and now works as an editor, writer, and translator. She published Cahiers de Violence in Paris in 2009, along with an anthology of Francophone poets from 5 continents. In 2014, she created Archivo Abierto, the historical app of the Fondo de Cultura Económica. She is the digital editor of the Review of the University of Mexico and is a presenter on TV UNAM. She is noted for the fictional work Hemotoma, published in 2019, as well as Los Muros de Aire y otras, crónicas de frontera, a portion of which was published in English as Walls of Aire in a collective book entitled Let's Talk About Your Wall. Next, Nora Krug was born in Karlsruhe, Germany in 1977 as well. She is the author and illustrator of Diaries of War, an illustrated account of Russia's war on Ukraine. She is also the author of a well-known graphic memoir entitled Belonging, A German Reckons with History and Home, entitled Heimat, or Home in German. Nora Krug is an associate professor at the Parsons School of Design in New York. Her drawings and visual narratives have appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, and Le Monde Diplomatique. She is the recipient of multiple fellowships and other rewards and distinctions, among which Illustrator of the Year by the Victoria and Albert Museum. And she was also the winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award in Autobiography in 2019. And lastly, Yuri Andrukhovych was born in 1960 in Ivano-Frankivsk in Western Ukraine. Yuri is one of the most popular figures in contemporary Ukrainian literature. A poet, essayist, novelist, and performer, he founded the literary performance group Boo-Ba Boo, Burlesque Balagan Bouffonade, and his work has been translated into 20 languages. He's published in French, in case you're looking for his work, by Édition Noir sur Blanc. He has written novels such as 12 Cercles, 2009, which recounts the chaotic journey of an Austrian photographer in the Carpathian Mountains of Ukraine, and Perversion, 2005, which depicts another journey, this time to Venice. In 2021, he published Lexique de mes villes intimes, guide de géopolitique et de cosmopolitique, a fascinating dictionary or encyclopedia of 44 cities. In 2014, Yuri received the Hannah Arendt Prize for Political Thought. So we have indeed a very talented and brilliant panelist to discuss this topic with you today. I'm going to start by asking the three panelists to think about and talk to us about their connection to Judaism, to Jews, and more specifically, anti-Semitism. But first of all, I have some very specific questions about their books. So I'll just sit down here. Nora, you've written about your German family and your home, Heimat, in an effort to understand your family's connections to a case of what I consider a case of catastrophic anti-Semitism, of course, the Holocaust. Nora, can you tell us about your motivation for writing a book like this and for probing into the history of your family? And
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. I have other questions.
Thanks everybody for being here. Thanks for having me at this festival. As you just said, I'm German. I grew up in Germany. At the age of 19, I left Germany to study in England and then moved to the United States to pursue my graduate study. And as a German growing up in Germany, I learned a lot about the Second World War and the Holocaust because it's a big part of our school curriculum and continues to be. So we went to concentration camp museums, we analyzed Adolf Hitler's speeches word by word, we interviewed survivors who had come from Israel and America to talk to us. So it was a very strong component of our education. And along with it, though, we felt a strong sense of collective shame and guilt. And this guilt had a paralyzing quality. So a lot of Germans of my generation grew up with a sense of not feeling any pride in our German cultural identity, in Germany's cultural achievements that happened long before the Nazis came along. We never learned old folk songs. We never learned the lyrics to our national anthem, even though those have been changed since the Nazis. So this idea of cultural identity for us Germans is still very conflicted and still very informed by this inherited guilt and living with the legacy of what the Nazis did. But then when I moved abroad, I was often confronted with negative stereotypes, understandably, about my country. People shouting Heil Hitler in England or Japan or America. One time somebody spat at me in Brooklyn because I was speaking German to somebody else. So I, as a German abroad, we tend to hide our cultural identity a little bit. And when I moved to New York, which is a very Jewish city because many Jewish refugees came there during the Nazi regime and then stayed, I realized that I had to confront this subject in a new way because I wasn't only coming there as an individual, but as a representative of my country. So I realized that leaving my country also meant representing it abroad, and along with it, its history. And I realized that even though I had learned so much about the Holocaust in school, I actually knew nothing about what happened in my family. And I realized that that was a big taboo that still existed in my generation, even though we learned so much in school. We completely forgot to ask each other, what did your grandparents do? What happened in your street? What happened in your home, in your house? Did Jews live in your house and they had to flee? Or did your grandparents buy a house cheaply from a Jewish person because they had to flee? So I realized that I had a personal responsibility and that I didn't want to hide behind the collective shame, and also that I could free myself from this sense of paralysis by targeting this subject in a more personal way. And so I went back to Germany to research what my family had done. And out of this came this book, which is a visual memoir, because I'm also an illustrator, that talks about my journey of trying to find out what happened in my family. It talks about what that means to me today, and what being a German in my generation means to me today.
Thank you very much for that. I have a small quotation from your book that I'd like to read. Over time, fragmentary stories, photographs, and documents rose back to the surface like bloated corpses. Memories turned into legends, legends turned into memories. So I'd like to just have a comment from you. How important was it to keep these memories alive through your literature? But what is the boundary between legend and memory? And what is the effect of turning these memories into art?
So I think what I was interested in was that the stories that we tell each other and ourselves about war, because I think in every country our sense of national identity or cultural identity is deeply impacted by the stories we tell each other in families, but also in schools. And I think that there's a certain power and also a certain danger in that. For instance, the way that people, still in France, I would say, talk about the Second World War, their narrative is one of la résistance. But there were concentration camps in southern France from which Jews, French Jews, were transferred to Auschwitz that were run by French police. The US-American narrative is the narrative of the liberators. Again, a very positive, highly elevated narrative, where in fact, a lot of times Jews were denied visas and they could not escape the Holocaust because they were not given a visa by the United States. In Germany, the opposite was the case. The narrative was only one of death and destruction and collaboration, even though there was also a resistant movement. I mean, it was small, but we never talked about that either. So I think what I'm trying to do with my work is to break through these narratives, these family narratives. We all, when we're being told what happened in our families, we immediately accept that. I mean, my family always said that my grandfather never shot anybody, never killed anybody, never held a gun in his hand. And we just accepted it because we wanted to believe it. And so I really believe in deconstructing these narratives through my work, through my illustrations and through the narratives, and also looking at, keeping these narratives alive. The true narrative alive, both on the side of the victims, but also the perpetrators, because I think it's also important that we document the narratives of the perpetrators, because we need to learn why a regime like the Nazi regime was possible and why so many Germans supported it. And if we don't listen to these narratives, I think we won't be able to understand them and defend ourselves against the same thing from happening again in the future.
Thank you. Yuri, among the 44 cities you look at in your book, the Lexique, you write about Lviv. Lviv was a site of pogroms and mass killings of Jews during the Second World War. And you write about this, il y a à Lviv trop de lieux maudits pour une petite ville. Or in English, in Lviv there are too many cursed places for a small town. Can you comment on that?
I start by greeting. Our meeting should be held in Ukrainian language too, so I just greet you in Ukrainian, Добрий день, and then I switch to English. So actually, I was born in the region of Western Ukraine, which used to belong to old Habsburgian monarchy, Austrian-Hungarian monarchy. And before the First War, it was one of the quite, I would say, lucky regions in the meaning of coexistence of different ethnical groups and cultures. And one of the favorite Western Ukrainian cities now, one of the favorite cities for Jewish people in that region was Chernovitz, Černivtsi, where, for example, the outstanding poet Paul Celan was born, and the second most famous German-speaking Jewish poet Rosa Ausländer. But many, many other talented poets and artists and painters who had Jewish religion or Jewish ethnical heritage, they came from that part of Western Ukraine. But of course, there was also the period of different occupations. And I would say it was the big continent of culture. I translated some of texts written by Jewish authors, and I always knew about this big genocide in our region. Pogrom is actually Russian word, and the first pogroms took place in the beginning of 20th century on the other territories of Russian Empire. And you are right, the biggest arenas, so to speak, biggest places of these crimes were, for example, Odessa or Kyiv, today's Ukrainian capital, or Moldavian capital Chisinau. And it was a part of Russian Tsarist politics against the Jewish minority in the Russian Empire. What was first of all made by Russian army as they conquered Lviv? It was in German Lemberg, in Polish Lwów. As they conquered it in 1914, they started by pogroms too, and there was a big Jewish escape, evacuation, exodus to more western regions of empire, of Austrian Empire. So many of them came to Vienna, and they were probably the first refugees of that time, of the First War. And then this horror came back in 1941 with Nazi occupation. So actually it was different form of Holocaust committed in Ukraine. It was not the Holocaust made by gas cameras, but made by firing squads. Holocaust made by bullets. So the biggest of these memorial places now is Babin Yar in Kyiv, as many people know this name. During the last 2 September days in 41, there were a big, actually endless firing squad, and 34,000 of Jewish people were killed. And what we have in the city where I was born was, in German they called it Blaumontag. First of all, it was made in August 41. They just ordered that some representatives of Jewish elite come to police office, which was at the same time the biggest prison. And during these first days of August, it began at August 4th and then till August 8th. They annihilated there more than 400 representatives of Jewish intellectuals, doctors, lawyers, and among them there were 28 poets, actors, painters. We could, in the last years, we could research this topic and we could find out and somehow register the names of each person in this list of artists. But we still didn't make some, I would say, we could start by some huge exposition about these people, and we could start by publishing of what they did. So it's, so to speak, work in progress. So if I might, I would stop here at that point.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Yael, you've written about walls, and when you write about wall, you're talking mainly about the wall between Mexico and the United States. And you've written about the caravans of migrants working their way toward the wall. But in your description of this experience of the migrants in Mexico, you have two references that I picked out to Jews during the Second World War. So I just quote them. You mentioned that the Central American migrants who are going through Mexico on their way to trying to get into the US are made to wear plastic bracelets to identify them, the way people would at an all-inclusive resort. But you say that these remind you of the yellow stars that the Jews wore to distinguish them from the Germans. And the second thing you mention is you refer to concentration camps, because you're watching one of the migrants eat elegantly, even though this person doesn't have utensils. And you say, I was astonished, especially because in my family of European migrants, we are savages at the table. We instinctively attack our food as though we might be thrown back into a concentration camp at any moment. So these two references to very horrific situations, can you comment on the relationship between those memories that you have and the wall in Mexico?
Sure. Hello to you all. I was listening to Nora and thinking I grew up in the other side of that event. I have grandparents. I grew up in Mexico from Jewish mother and father. And my grandparents, on one side, there was one survivor from the German Holocaust, or the Nazi Holocaust. And on the other side, there were French that were able to flee. And on both sides, there was a big sense of loss and of trauma. And there was always this thing that we were told since we were children, that anti-Semitism isn't over. It might happen again. So you have to be very careful. And you would never be allowed to, I mean, you should be not show off that you are Jewish. You're all the time there in the Mexican society, but you shouldn't show too much that who you are, so they don't recognize you. and also that Israel was created not for ending anti-Semitism, as this was never going to end, but to provide a safe place to go in case anti-Semitism will sprout again, and that it would. That was a bit a tragic thing that was taught on us, that this is a cycle that will come back. And I think part of the work I've been trying to do on myself is trying to work out of this trauma, because when you're afraid and paranoid, you do very bad decisions, and you can do very bad things, right? So we have these images all the time hanging around us because we grew with them, and we have to manage to take distance from them. And I'm talking about these images because in many situations, as this one, those images come back from my memories because they were put on as grains on me. And so I remember the migrants that was in Tijuana. They were wearing this bracelet. And why? Actually, it was for being able to enter the camp, right? The migrant camp. But it happens also that was the only way you can distinguish them from from some other Mexicans that were living in Mexico. There is a very great song by the Tigres del Norte, this group that sings a lot about Chicano culture, you know, this northern Mexican culture and southern American culture. And there is a song about a migrant from El Salvador that is crossing his way to the United States and says, I don't understand why in Mexico they say I'm a stranger. We have the same color and the same language, right? So people look very much alike. They talk Spanish, they speak Spanish, and they look like Mexicans. It's not like, for example, when the Asians came or when the Ukrainians came too, they look very different. You can spot them. The South American, you cannot spot him that easily. So when they wear bracelets, you are able on the streets. That was not of course, that was not the meaning of the bracelet. They put it just so they could receive food, right? You have your bracelet, so it means you're registered, first of all, which is for clandestinity, it's not very good because a lot of them didn't want to be registered. But if you want to have a safe place to sleep and a way to have some of the army's soup, they were preparing this big soup, you must wear your bracelet. But it also helped to see them in the streets and say, oh, this guy working here, actually he's a migrant, he has this bracelet. And it reminded me, of course, of Jewish because of the star that was needed so to distinguish them from the rest of the Germans, because we look at very much like Germans. Actually, we are more or less, I could also look like a German, I guess. And I have thought a lot that when we have so many racism around the world and so many problems, of some other wars going around, when they have 500,000 people, for example, Ethiopians that were killed in 2021 and 22. 500,000 were killed there in the northern part, in the northern province. That was a bit rebellious next to Eritrea. We have 500,000 people dead in Syria. We have huge numbers in Yemen and this. But we are very much centered on the conflict in the Middle East because it's within us. Like the Western culture has always had Israel and Jewish inside. The Christians came out from, they read the Bible. It's like they had the good news that Jesus was born, and some people didn't believe it. but they stayed inside that Western culture. So it's the enemy within that you don't see. It's the enemy we have within us, and that's why it's so scary, and that's why we care so much, because it's inside our society, and it's also the enemy every one of us thinks it has inside, and the societies feel this enemy invisible but working. Not only in the migrants, where the migrants were there, I felt this with the bracelets, also in the pandemic. I was very much remembered of all my grandparents suffered and all these images that I grew with, because there was the person that had COVID, well, you couldn't know who it was. Like, if they don't say it or you don't test it, you don't know. It's the enemy, invisible enemy within us that you cannot recognize, spot, and put apart, or be careful. You cannot recognize. It advances masked. He looks like all of us, right? And I felt very much this suspicion about people that would be coughing, or like, are these the enemy inside us? So I think this goes, just to answer about the bracelet, like the story of my family comes out of suddenly not being recognized in the place they live, suddenly being marked as, oh, you are different, you don't look different, but you have something different. You're very similar to us, but you have to be treated apart, right? So, but as I was saying, this imaginary is not a good thing. It just draws some likeliness sometimes. And I think we have to get, as I said, out of this trauma heritage we all have, also for the enemies inside us, like inside myself, I have some enemies too. So, and to learn to deal with trauma and make it disappear. Trauma is not good, fear is not good. This doesn't allow us to act correctly. And as the hunger thing, yes, I think as we eat, it's very funny. My family, like, we eat very fast, and they would like clap. They would be very angry if you don't finish your plate, and they would clap if you finish your plate. And if you ate a lot, they would clap even more. And I remember all these survivors in the temples in Mexico that would wait till the end of every dinner or every Shabbat. Afterwards, there is food, and it was so heartbreaking. They would open their bags and put inside the food that didn't nobody touch it. So they would take it home, little old ladies and little old men, you know. And it was very sad to see that, because. And the persons that were now migrating through Mexico, some of them come from a place where they didn't move for generations. They were there. That's the people. Some people move. Some people stay. Have the chance to be staying there for undisturbed till now in their ancestry land, and suddenly it's dry, or it's underwater, or next door they have a big plantation that they cannot live anymore, so they have to move. But they still don't have that trauma, and so they feel food is there all the time. They eat very slowly, very peacefully. I'm jealous of this. And I'm also very sad, because maybe they won't find food anymore on their way up. I mean, maybe this peacefulness, well, it's on its end. I don't know.
Well, thanks to the three of you for sharing your thoughts. The question, I guess the elephant in the room is the situation in the Middle East, as you said, Yael, and what kind of impact is that having on anti-Semitism? Do you think anti-Semitism is still alive? Do you think it's on the upswing? Does the political situation that we have in the world today, is that affecting it? What can we do? What are we doing? Is anti-Semitism part of a wider range of anti-whatever in this world? So what are your thoughts? And perhaps you have questions that you'd like to ask of the other panelists. So I'm going to let you loose on this.
Oh, this is a question for me.
No, just for all three of you.
Ah.
Anybody want to jump in first?
I'll just say something very short.
Okay.
Because I already said it, is I think racism, gender discrimination, none of this has disappeared, and anti-Semitism neither, right? It's been always there. The sun always gets up and always goes down. People always mark difference with each other. Wars, we thought maybe with the United Nations there will not be wars. They are wars, terrible wars, like all the time. Like it won't disappear. It's the way we can manage it so the damage is the less possible, and it doesn't spring out, and it doesn't make very big damage. That's the point, I think.
Nora.
I mean, it's such a difficult question. I do think that we live in a society that's more and more polarized. And I agree with what you just said, that I think anti-Semitism, racism, homophobia, I mean, any hatred towards any group will never go away. I think, to me, it's more like a germ that is there, and you have to try to watch its development. You have to have, obviously, legislation in place, rules in place that that go against it, concrete measures that a government can take. I think the situation in the Middle East obviously doesn't help. There's a lot of criticism towards the Israeli government's current military actions. I do think also that terrorism is something that never disappears, and the mere idea that you can exterminate terrorism is also very naive, to go into a country and clear it of terrorism. I think that just creates more terrorism in the future, because any refugee that's experiencing the death of their parents now in Gaza and grows up under terrible conditions in some camp will have feelings of hatred and could become the next terrorist. So I think it's a very difficult situation. I mean, obviously there are many things that governments can and should do. One thing is education. You need to learn about the histories of all of these countries and cultures and religions. For instance, as a German, I really believe that any immigrant who chooses Germany as their new home has to undergo a Holocaust education, because if you come from a country where that education doesn't exist, or there's even Holocaust denial, and then you come to Germany, I think you need to be informed about what actually happened in the country where you move to. Same is true for myself. Coming as a German and becoming an American, I need to learn about the history of slavery and, Native Americans that were killed and mistreated, because that is now part of my responsibility as an American. And so education obviously is an important component in this. Also language, we need to be aware of language, because language is always the seed of violence. I mean, obviously it begins in the head, but then it's uttered, and then it turns into physical violence. So I think really thinking carefully about how we use language, where is the border, when does hate speech begin versus freedom of speech, and what should a government do to punish hate speech? Those are very important questions, I think. And it doesn't matter to me if it's about anti-Semitism or against Muslim populations or against white old men. I don't care what the group is, but any sort of hate speech should be very sharply prosecuted, and we just need to know as a society where is the limit and how do we deal with that.
I have just some general assumptions. And first of all, I think anti-Semitism is a form of what we call xenophobia, the hardest, most aggressive form of xenophobia. And of course, it belongs to this anti-culture of hate and fear altogether creates xenophobia. But Jewish faith is very special because this notion, this culture, this direction is always used from different hate perspectives, historically, because the people who are anti-Semitic, they need to have some symbol. And being Jewish is always somehow symbolized. I mean here different historic periods, but there is always a kind of aggressive potential in each society, aggressive energy. And this energy was always very often projected and directed into Jews. So we can start by Christians, and the Jews became a symbol of evil for Christians, then for Islam. Then it was the period they were a symbol of communist thinking for right political systems. And they became a symbol of capitalism and banking chiefs for communist systems. And now they became a symbol for general anti-Western rhetorics and critics towards Western world at all. In that situation with the protests on the campuses in many universities, there are, of course, extreme cases like maybe you remember last year there was in Maryland, I think, at some universities, among the protesters there were a kind of graffiti Holocaust 2.0, which is actually a criminal thing, openly criminal thing. But generally, the state of Israel is now understood as the most active part of the Jewish nation, and they are made to be a symbol of this Western hegemony on the world. And it is actually the uprising of so-called global South against this part of Western world, which is democratic, which has an open society in Israel, I mean, and this is a kind of an attempt to destroy this enclave in organism of global South, which is despotic, which is religiously fanatical, and so on. So the protester somehow don't note the cases of Iran, where they recently executed very critical young artist, raper, who criticized the system very sharply, so he was just killed in a prison. They don't note the crimes of China against Uyghur people. They don't note the big aggression of Russia against Ukraine, the everyday bombings of our cities, and annihilating of infrastructure in the cities. And they have just this only position against the state of Israel. And it's a very, you see, it's very selective approach. Softly speaking, is very selective, because I dare to think there is just a new stage, new form, new kind of banal anti-Semitism in it.
And do you have questions of each other?
You talk about symbols, and yes, now this conflict is a symbol. No, it symbolizes again the people that are powerful against people that are suffering for something. I think it's when you do activism or when you're a political leader, you have to be very simple, and things are not that simple. But as you have to do a wrong and a right, and very simple things to believe, so everybody can join. So it does a very, it becomes very symbolic in the way that is evil or power against people from the poor, undefended, and I think this is a problem. I think anti-Semitism, as I was saying, it's with Ukrainian was another war that was very much covered, much more than the Ethiopian, Yemenite, you know, all these other, or the Uyghurs in China, because also it's very close to Europe, it's very close to Western culture. And as I was saying, Israel is inside our culture. Also Western culture, so people feel very implicated. And well, the United States is implicated. I don't know about Canada, maybe you can tell me, but I know there's money coming from the United States, so people have to say something. The problem is, I can see it as when two neighbors, I don't know, have a problem, and then the whole neighborhood comes in, and then the city, and it makes it bigger every time, more complex and more difficult to get out of the conflict with all those people that don't have the background jumping in on very simple and on a simplifying way. And the anti-Semitism that will never disappear, as racism, as slavery. Slavery has never been more slaves in the world, with other words, right? It's like in a fire where you have this red, how do you call the part under the fire that is still red?
Embers.
Yeah, embers, right? And so if you start blowing and blowing and everybody starts blowing, it gets out of control, and that is very scary.
I would ask Nora, you, because I'm looking on the book which was mentioned, but maybe you tell more about belonging, this project. Yeah, you can.
Do you have a particular focus thing that I should focus on, or?
Just how did you create it?
Yeah.
And, because I see there is a lot of pictures, not just the text, and so what is the audience?
Yeah, well, there was a hope that the audience would also include younger people, you know, students, and it's always a little, while I'm always grateful for an audience, I'm always disappointed at how few younger generation, you know, students come to these events about subjects on anti-Semitism, for instance, because it's a subject that concerns all of us. The hope here had been, I mean, I didn't create this for younger people, but that because it's illustrated, that it would attract a younger audience. I mean, this book has been declared a school lecture in Germany, so the German state has printed special editions of this book to be read in schools. So in Germany, thankfully, it is used for this purpose. But I'm an illustrator by trade, but the goal for me was not that the images would simplify the content, but on the contrary, just as I try with the words, I try to use images to break our notions or stereotypical ideas of war, of memory, of culture. So what you were saying earlier about these black and white views, or you talked about it as well, I think that's the role of the author, right? Is to try to break those very stereotypical ideas. And I try to do that both as a writer, but also as an illustrator. So I try to find photographs, historic photographs, also that to me represent a completely different type of war. For example, there's one particular kind of page that so this is, as I said before, the narrative of this book focuses on my journey of trying to find out what my grandparents did or didn't do under the Nazi regime. But the story is also interrupted by encyclopedic and archival pages that I put together and that I insert into the family narrative in various moments in the book, so that the reader can take a break from my family and look at the subject from a more collective level and then re-enter the personal story. So one type of this kind of page is called From the Scrapbook of a Memory Archivist. And basically, I've been going to flea markets across Germany over the last 10 years to collect personal items, photographs, objects, items of memory that were owned by Germans in the 1930s and 40s, because I wanted to understand what did this feel like to live in that generation at that time. My grandparents did not talk to me about this, so I needed to find proof, physical proof, elsewhere. This is why I've been going to flea markets to collect these items. Actually, one thing, the most shocking find that I found was at a Turkish flea market in Berlin, where I found a German soldier's photo album. You were talking about some of the massacres that happened in Eastern Europe, or in Ukraine specifically.
They always made the photographs.
Yeah.
They had special photographers in the structures, police structures and army structures, right?
But from what I've learned, I think you probably know more about this, they were not allowed to take the photographs as the massacres happened, or maybe you weren't allowed as a soldier to take private photographs, only before and after. That's what I read at one point. I don't know if it's true. So I found this private soldier's photo album at a Turkish flea market, and it said memories, talking about memories, on the spine. And it became clear to me what this was. I mean, you saw these scenes of German soldiers eating together, drinking beer, very harmless. But then there were 6 photographs that showed a town square where people were raising their hands, and in the background you could see dead people. And I had no idea where this was taken, these photographs were taken, because the photographs weren't labeled. So I took it to the German news magazine Der Spiegel. I went to the New York Times to find out if anybody could tell me, anybody would recognize this square. Nobody was able to tell me where this was, but one editor at Der Spiegel said that because some of the names of the buildings were German, that this was probably in Poland, because in Germany, they would have not shot people in a public space, because then the Germans would not have supported the Nazis anymore. So this kind of thing would have been done in Poland, but not in Germany. And Poland had a lot of German, ethnic Germans, as they say. So there were many German shop names, on the buildings. So he said this was probably taken in Poland. And so one evening I Googled the words massacre, Poland, Germany, town square, and I clicked on Google Images, and I found one other photograph showing the same exact moment and the same exact square, and that told me what it was. It was this massacre that happened right when Germany invaded Poland in 1939 in a small town called Bromberg. I can't pronounce the Polish name, but the German name was Bromberg. And what happened is that when Germany invaded Poland, there were ethnic Germans who supported the Nazis, who helped them enter... Volksdeutsche, who helped them enter the country. And a number of those were shot by Polish partisans. before the Germans entered, because they saw that they were trying to help the German soldiers, and so as a punishment, the Polish partisans shot some of them, the Volksdeutsche, and as an act of revenge, the Germans then lined up Polish partisans and Catholic priests on a town square and shot many more of them. And I found these photographs in the album at a flea market in Germany.
It's amazing.
And then I had to negotiate with the Turkish vendor. How much do you pay for a photo album like that? That's a document of history. It was a very uncomfortable situation for me to negotiate this price, but I bought the album, and this was a tangent.
It's interesting that you give the prices in the book too. €2, which is very interesting. How little really you had to pay for those extremely important documents. We have about 5 minutes left, and I'd like to open this up to questions from the audience. Maybe 4 questions at the most. Sherry.
Yes, I would start by the sentence that I'm very proud that Ukraine, which was traditionally claimed as one of the territories of some historic anti-Semitism, in 2019 has elected the president, who is Jewish Ukrainian, and it wasn't hidden. It was openly formulated and proposed to the society. So I think it's a very positive sign, especially if we think that his support was fantastically high, 73%. It was never a result for presidential values. So it's actually a clear sign that Ukrainian society is being now more tolerant and modern than in the bad times of what we call the first and second big wars and interwar time. It was for Ukraine. It is very good, very strong book written by American historian Timothy Snyder. He called his book about Holocaust in Ukraine. He called it Black Earth. I highly recommend to read this big research. And about genocide against Ukrainians, there is also a book written by him, which is called Bloody Lands. Yeah, Bloodlands. Yeah. So it's actually just a history of violence where, of course, Ukrainian nationalists took part as this kind of Hilfspolizei while German occupation. There was a special kind of police, and they were, so to speak, assistants of Nazi executors. But there is also, we have to realize the fact that this nationalist movement in Ukraine was always very, very, very different. There was, and they were also enemies to each other. And for example, this in our city, which at that time has been called Stanislav, Ivano-Frankivsk now, there was a first big firing squad of this Ukrainian policeman made by Nazis in September 41. So it was quite simultaneously with first Holocaust crimes. So it was a really very difficult situation. I'm trying to somehow to explain it, to decipher these difficulties by my text, which is unfortunately not translated yet into English or French, but it is a part of my novel, The Darlings of Justice, and this part is about the times of Nazi occupation in my native city. And the only thing which is now for today's Ukrainian society is very important to preserve this memory, to show the memorial places to our guests, and to have it as a part of very important, essential part of our historic memory, the crimes committed against Jewish population in our country.
Unfortunately, I think our time is up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was too. But the question was quite difficult.
I want to, I suppose if you have questions, our guests might be available to answer them privately, but I want to thank Blue Metropolis for having had the courage to mount a panel of this kind. I want to hope for the end of anti-Semitism and the end of all of the antis in the world, and let's hope for peace in the world, or more peace in the world than we have today. I have to also thank our supporters and sponsors, Mitzi and Del Dobrin Family Foundation, Zeller Family Foundation, Studio littéraire ukrainien à Montréal, Fédération nationale ukrainienne du Québec, the Azrieli Foundation, and Ginny Stikeman. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for being a great audience.